Okay, let's talk about drums and bass. We're going to talk about what the relationship between the drums and bass are, and how do they really play together, and how do they work together to form a great foundation. Okay, let me zoom in here. This is the kick drum for this song. And then I've played a couple different bass parts different ways for some examples. Let's give this first one a listen here.
I am nothing without you. Instead of bringing all I have, I'm prone to give whatever's left. Oh, remind my soul you die by die.
All right, so the main things to really think about as a bass player and drummer, like it's the kick drum. As a bass player, you should really be focusing on what the kick drum's doing. Kick drum's going to pretty much define when you play. So you want to be able to play the right note and then at the right time. And also you want to follow when the kick drum plays. So on this example, I'm playing basically kick. See, I'm lining up here, kick, 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 right? Kick, kick. Okay, so let's
I'm
listen again, knowing that's what we're doing.
without you. Instead of bringing all I have.
Okay, so there it goes. The second example down here, I'm playing more whole notes, and so I'm not leaving a gap. So in this situation, I'm choosing to have a gap between this note and this note, just to leave some space. So when I play this note, see, the bass is pretty loud, and then it stops, and then the bass goes again, and then it goes away and goes again and goes away. Now, if like down here, I play that note the whole time. So if I did that here, the bass would start and it would just be kind of loud, and then it would just barely move up, and then barely move up. And so there's not a lot of difference. So if you want to create some like power and some like movement in the air in the room, like that beat, that kick drum and that bass, that feel in your chest, I just call it like take a breath before you play the next note. So many things in music is like you can relate to it as like talking or communication, like people talking. If somebody's talking and talking and talking without taking a breath, like it gets kind of like, it wears you down a little bit. So having that space is pretty important. Now, and there's some situations where you don't want that. Let's say if it was like a soft part in the song, and you want those to connect. But generally, having a little bit of gap is gonna help create a beat. Okay, so let's move to this track here. So this one is going to demonstrate two different things. It's going to demonstrate how not leaving that breath of air before you play your next note, what that feels like. But then also on this track, I played the bass. I picked the string a little bit harder. You're going to hear the difference. It's going to have like slappy sounds and like popping, and just the quality of the bass doesn't sound that great. Although the notes I'm playing are the same. Let's give this a listen.
Instead of bringing all I have, I'm prone to give whatever's left. Oh, remind my soul you die by die, and all my life is in.
Okay, so it's really locking in, and it's kind of creating some power between that kick and bass. So this one, I don't do that here. See, I've connected those notes together. Let's see what that does.
Instead of bringing all I have, I'm prone to give whatever's left. Oh, remind my soul you die by die, and all my life is in your head.
Okay, let's listen again to this first one.
Instead of bringing all I have, I'm prone to give whatever's left. Oh, remind my
So it's a real subtle difference in how you're playing it, but it translates to a big difference in the audience. That groove is there. That groove feels better. Let's talk more a little bit about the drums and bass relationship. So for a bass player, that kick drum is what they're listening for. That's what we want to hear. We're listening for the singer where we are in the song, maybe a keyboard or something to kind of know where we are with chords. But then really we're listening for that kick drum and maybe the metronome a little bit. So the bass player wants the drummer to play a consistent kick drum pattern, something that they can follow. It's really hard to lock into a drummer if they're changing their kick drum pattern up a little bit, or any really, because you can't predict what they're going to do. And if you're not playing bass with that kick drum, when that happens, it just kind of it's just not as impactful and it gets kind of muddy. And your job as bass and drums is like that foundation of the song. Like you want to have a very clear, in time, solid foundation. And so you can't do that if the drummer keeps changing the beat a little bit, or if the bass player is not following the drummer who is playing a consistent beat. Those two need to lock in. So the things that we're talking about mainly here with all these videos are making sure we're playing the right notes, the right chords, making sure we're playing those notes and chords in the right time, and then also how are we playing our instruments, the quality, the sound of that instrument. Here's an example on bass where I played the strings harder, and you're going to start to hear some like popping noises and buzzing. It just doesn't sound very good, but here's an example. Okay, so you kind of hear how it's not very consistent. Each note's not very consistent. Like there's loud parts, and whenever those loud parts happen, you hear like a high frequency, like a slap, that string noise, and that's something we want to stay away from. Let me solo this version and kind of listen to this is trying to be played with a firm, consistent finger on the bass strings. Right, so that was played very smoothly. I wasn't hitting the strings harder than I needed to, but I was hitting them hard enough where the tone was well. I had the low end happening, and then there were some of the higher frequencies of those notes coming through, but it wasn't overwhelming the low end. It was a balanced sound. Okay, so you can kind of practice that if I play this G, and I'm going to play real soft. And then I'm going to gradually get louder and louder. Okay, so the louder and harder I played, so you hear that noise, and that doesn't sound very good. But let's talk about the saying less is more. The less you play, the more value you're adding to the song. The more you play, likely the less value you're adding to the song. So think of it as a conversation. If we're having a conversation and I'm talking a lot and I'm not giving any space and I'm just kind of, my thoughts are going everywhere, opposed to if I was very precise in what I was saying and I had pauses in what I was saying, you can kind of think of that in how you play bass also. So this track right here is played less is more. Like I'm literally only playing the root note of the chord with the kick drum pattern. If the drummer was playing a more complicated kick drum pattern, I'm not necessarily going to play every single time with him. So I want to break down his beat to the simplest version of that, and then that's what I want to stick to. And really concentrate on sticking to that pattern and locking into that kick drum in time. Like, make sure you're right in time with him and you're not rushing, you're not playing faster, or you're not playing slower. Typically, live, we're going to play faster because we get excited. And then also making sure I'm playing the right note every time. So less is more. So this was an example of less is more. And that seems like a very boring part to play. It's the most important part to play. It's covering all those things. It's locking into the kick drum pattern. The bass, the quality of the bass sounds good. I'm not hitting the strings too hard or too soft, and I'm trying to be very consistent with it. I'm hitting the right note every time. The bass and drums are the meat and potatoes of that song. So you want to just stick to those fundamentals and leave room for the other instruments to be more creative with other parts and adding color and different flavors to the track. And it's not necessarily the bass player and the drummer's part to cover those things. So play simply, play the right notes, playing time, and leave that space for the rest of the band to occupy. Here's an example of me not doing that, where I'm playing a lot. I'm not
without you. Instead of bringing all I have, I'm prone to give whatever's left. Oh,
okay. So that's just playing too much. And the things I hear when I'm playing that are, my ear's distracted. What am I listening to? What part of the conversation is drawn to my ear? Well, there's two things happening right now. There's the guitar melody that's happening, and then the bass thing's happening here. For the listener, I want the listener to to pay attention to the guitar part and not the bass player's part. So it's hard to not pay attention to the bass player here while he's playing a lot. He's kind of covering up that melody. Let's listen again. So it feels like too many people are talking at the same time. Here's the simplified version. And then now pay attention to that guitar part, and you're going to hear it better. Right, so not only did I hear that melody part better, but also there's a rhythm guitar in there doing palm mutes that, let's listen to again, see if you can pick it out. Right? So now I can hear it because I'm staying out of the way and I'm leaving room for the other instruments to have their part. So now try to listen for that electric palm mute part while I'm doing this. Harder to hear that. So less is more. Always think about that. And it's hard being on stage thinking, man, I'm really only playing a whole note, root note of every chord. Like, that sounds boring. I know I can do a lot more than that. You're going to use 10% of your skills 90% of the time. So the skills that you need here are the correct note, play in time with that kick drum, really lock in. Like, that's the number one goal, the correct note and locking into that kick drum as a bass player. As a musician, you're treating what you're playing differently in a worship setting, right? Because we're not there to hear a bass solo. People aren't in the worship center to hear a bass solo, to hear fancy playing. They're there to worship God. So they're here for an experience, and we don't want to have any distractions to take them away from that. We're leading worship. We're leading them in worship. Bad notes happen. It happens to all of us. But when that does happen, like, there is a level of distraction to the audience. As playing in the worship band, we want to minimize all the distractions. And all the instruments, really, it's okay to feel like, man, I know I can play more. I know I could do something different. But in this scenario, it's a probably better choice not to. It's to find the simplest thing, making sure you're you're not being a distraction by, accidentally hitting a wrong note or hitting the bass loud and that note pops out a little bit louder. So in general, just keeping those things in mind will kind of help some of your decisions playing. I hope that helps a little bit, whether you're new to playing worship or, you've done this for a long time. There's always something that we can do to fine tune and just make the experience for our listeners that much better. All right, guys. Thanks a lot.